got you! I got you! Sorry, I can't remember anybody's names!
Sometimes you need to be able to do more than a spider can, and for that you're gonna need a really good suit and some cool gear. Peter Parker got a pretty sweet set of abilities when he received that radioactive spider bite. His bench press started to rival the towing capacity of a heavy-duty truck. He got super agile. He gained a premonition for when to use that agility, and he got sticky. Ugh. For the rest of it, he had to rely on his big brain, and the big brain of his new peers. When Spider-Man deals with the consequences of dinking with time and space, he might need all the gadgets and doodads he can get his hands on. Let's take an inventory.
Activating instant kill.
No, I don't want to kill anybody.
A lot of the things that Tony Stark gets genius credit for isn't really all that genius. Even the ancient Greeks knew that wearing a little metal would be handy in a fight, and lots of people have come up with new and inventive ways to blow things up. Granted, no one has come up with arc reactors or repulsor rays, and the flying suits we have are pretty terrible. Still, the real super genius move is Stark's creation of not one but several high-functioning AIs, including one that became a real boy thanks to an Infinity Stone and an Asgardian jumpstart. Stark replaced Jarvis with Friday when Jarvis ran off with a war orphan who happened to be a Nexus being. For Stark's protege, he got an AI with a name that's having a bit of a tough go at the moment, Karen.
Good evening, Peter.
Hello?
The original suit took a beating at the hands of Mysterio, but the Iron Spider suit sat that fight out. He also got amped up with AI that made Karen seem like Siri, Edith. Parker might need a digital assistant now that he has to clear the universe of previous Spider-Man's baddies.
Hello, Peter.
Between being sticky and being able to shoot webs that he swings from, Peter Parker as Spider-Man can pretty easily slip the surly bonds of Earth and dance the skies. But instead of John Gillespie McGee Jr.'s laughter-silvered wings, when Spider-Man needs to control the must-come-down part of what goes up, he's been known to deploy a set of webbed wings on his suit. Those don't grant Spider-Man flight in the same way a flying squirrel doesn't really fly, but rather falls gracefully. He's deployed those wings to backflip over a helicopter in Homecoming and control his dive in London during Far From Home. Peter cribbed from his nemesis Green Goblin to create a spider glider when he squared up against the Equinox. But he must not have liked it much because it hasn't gotten much use since. Spider glider, really? John Gillespie McGee Jr. was the guy who came up with that whole slip the surly bonds of Earth thing in a poem called High Flight. Now, we both learned a thing. The main problem with roaming the city trying to fight crime is that most of the time crime just doesn't dress up in an elaborate suit and broadcast their intent to do no good in the middle of Times Square. I mean, in a superhero world, it's not unheard of, but usually doing so is the end of their elaborate plan for world domination, or whatever it is they're up to. In order to foil their wicked plans, you first have to know what their wicked plans are. For that, Spider-Man can deploy his enhanced surveillance mode. That triggers a raft of abilities that other superheroes have, like amplified hearing and a set of visual aids like thermal and X-ray vision.
Whoa, that's so cool.
The mode also records all that sweet info that Spider-Man gets and connects to a database that can cross-check the information to help figure out what the baddies are up to if they're not polite enough to just state their plans directly. Peter's gonna have a few new worlds to figure out in No Way Home, and gathering info could be invaluable. When engaging baddies, they don't always have the courtesy of grouping themselves in a convenient manner. They might even be so rude as to stand in a group but not nearby, meaning that big web will catch too many things before it even gets to the bad guys. If there was one way to shoot a web straight and then have it expand at the end where the bad guys are just asking for webbing, well, thanks to the enhanced web shooters courtesy of Stark, Spider-Man has just the thing in the form of web grenades. In this case, a ball of webbing shoots forward and then expands at a distance, catching thieves just like flies from a safe distance. Be sure to yell, "Web grenade!" when you do it, because it makes it fun. Drones seem to have taken a quick journey from cool to that weirdo with the drone. They've given anyone with a few $100 a bird's eye view of their surroundings, and has been the source of the money shot of every self-financed film on Vimeo. Using a drone to spy on people who can't hear whirring blades is creepy though. Unless you're a superhero using it to get intel on a supervillain. For that you'll need something more than just a DJI Mavic. You want something branded because, as Sam Wilson says, everyone's got a gimmick now.
You have a metal arm? That is awesome!
For the MCU, Tony Stark added a drone in the form of Spider-Man's chest emblem that can follow foes, as well as get an early look at what he might be facing around that corner. There's only so much you can expect the Spider-Sense to do. The suit was destroyed with his encounter with Mysterio, but he seemed to like it and may have included it in his new suit he designed on the way from the Netherlands to London. You'd think that a sixth sense would warn you of impending ill intent. Stickiness and the ability to lift several tons would be more than enough to take down the baddies. When he was recruited for the throwdown in the airport, in everyone's natural state, he was the strongest one there in his t-shirt. Vision had to drastically increase his density to outlift Spidey, and even Tony would have to summon Veronica to beat little Petey in a deadlift. But enough is never enough for Tony Stark, and he knew that the kid was going up against some seasoned fighters. So he built in an edge for his protege, Enhanced Combat Mode. This mode features all of the suit's offensive capabilities, like rapid-fire webbing, and target tracking, with Karen giving battle-related advice and updates.
Activate instant kill!
Even with a Spidey sense, Spidey can still end up taking a hit or two, or three. Pete really does take a beating, especially when he moves up leagues and finds himself on Titan, facing down the one they call the Mad Titan, sporting a mostly complete Infinity Gauntlet. For these situations, Tony has prepared the Iron Spider armor. What it lacks in repulsors and arc reactors, it makes up for in extra arms. Ooh. You can't have a guy going around calling himself Spider-Man while conspicuously sporting only 4 limbs, can you? The suit responds to a neural link, allowing Peter to activate features he didn't even know existed, like when the extra limbs deployed to keep him from being sucked out into space. The armor is similar to the one he was given for joining Iron Man's side in the comic book Civil War, until Captain America did his whole speech-making thing and Peter switched sides. The suit eventually went to the Scarlet Spider, where it got concussive blasts on top of the webbing. While the rumor mill is pretty dedicated to No Way Home being the Pete show, the multiverse could introduce us to some of the other Spider folk not named Peter. Even if that is the case, we've already seen Peter deploying the nanotech instant costume change feature. Maybe because Doc Ock just said hello, or maybe those shots aren't actually together. Always remember, we also saw the Hulk at the Battle of Wakanda in the Infinity War trailer. Psych! At the scene of the crime when Spider-Man has arrived just in time, generally speaking, he can spin a web any size that can catch thieves, not unlike flies getting caught in said webs. Most of the time, that'll do the trick, at least for your regular ne'er-do-well. But just like Vision's calculation, Spider-Man's strength has invited challenge. And challenge means that simply webbing someone might not do the trick. Sometimes you also need them to give you a minute. For that, he has Taser Webs that emit a bioelectric pulse that can temporarily stun his opponent. Peter upped the power on the Taser Webs when he rebuilt his suit, which he used to short out the drones Mysterio was using to create his illusions. With up to 6 opponents on deck for the wall crawler in No Way Home, that might be the advantage he needs. Probably not going to be that useful against Electro, though. There are a lot of options that Peter got with his Stark suit that didn't really get the time to try out, though he had a little time to mess with the settings when he wound up in the damage control storage facility. One of those modes is Arrow Web. Just in case Spider-Man wants to get on some of that Hawkeye action, sometimes you just have to puncture something instead of just making it gooey. Like if the Green Goblin shows up with his Goblin Glider, puncturing the drive system might just ground him. Another option on the list was the Venom Web. He didn't get to use it, but there are a few variations that might indicate what it can do. Venom, of course, is the most Peter-obsessed villain in the pantheon of villains obsessed with Peter. In the Capcom vs. Marvel video game, Venom has a special Venom Web move that covers the screen in webbing, allowing Venom to secure multiple combo hits. That's probably not what we're talking about here, though. It could also be a nod to another popular Spider-Man, Miles Morales, who in addition to the regular spider powers, got a Venom Blast that acts like the Taser Web by delivering a bioelectric shock. It's possible that we'll finally get to see what it can do in No Way Home. A stun web might be redundant when you have Taser Webs, but not everyone is susceptible to a Taser Blast. That's when you need to employ other methods, like rapidly pelting someone in rapid succession with little blasts to knock his opponent back and disorient them. It's an effective enough strategy that it's the default setting during Enhanced Combat Mode, which will almost certainly be in use when the villains from these 3 different franchises start ganging up on him.
Hey, what's wrong with my web shooters?
Rapid fire is the default for enhanced combat mode.
We all know what happens when Captain America throws his mighty shield. All those who oppose said shield must yield. I mean, it's right there in the song, folks. You can learn a lot about superheroes from their theme songs. Thanks to his Spidey sense, or Peter Tingle if you want to see him turn his red as his suit.
You should pack your suit, just in case. I have a tingle about it.
Please stop saying tingle, May.
Spider-Man can generally leap out of the way of danger, but sometimes danger comes at you, like a lot. One of the tricks that Green Goblin deployed to connect to the dodgy spider was randomizers in his pumpkin bombs in the hopes of confusing his danger sense. When you're dealing with that kind of threat, maybe you don't want to rely on flips and jumps. You want to get in on that sweet, sweet shield action. It may not bounce off walls, defying physics, but it will absorb a blow. Since the pumpkin bombs are back, he might need that extra protection. You might ask yourself, what's the difference between a spear web and an arrow web? And that's a pretty good question. They both appear on the list options of Peter's Stark-built suit, but you gotta figure ancient armies would have spears and archers. The spear has the advantage of being able to be used hand-to-hand and then thrown like a javelin. Not that a javelin helped the character Javelin in the Suicide Squad. But maybe we'll get a chance to see how he could use those two modes differently. In the MCU, Peter is a genius, just like he's been in every other iteration of the character. But with Stark providing Peter with all those upgrades, it might be easy to lose track of the fact that Peter has been gadgeting himself up since 1962, and long before he was finally allowed on the Avengers roster. One of the gadgets he would deploy often was his spider tracker. They were tiny magnetic tracking devices shaped like his spider symbol, because branding, that Spider-Man would use when a bad guy decided to make a break for it.
I put a tracker on someone. He's a bad guy.
Tracker located.
This allowed him to find villains in their lair and deal with them there, generally speaking with far fewer bystanders. Spider-Man has a tendency to attract villains that are not particularly susceptible to webbing, probably thinking they've picked the best hero to have as their nemesis because they're immune to his signature move. Sandman, Hydro Man, and Electro are all particularly hard to web, but once again Peter has the best superpower anybody can have in the Marvel Universe, and he had that long before an irradiated arachnid decided to take a taste of Parker's hand. He's got a big old brain. So when it comes to having to deal with the guy who can not only control electricity, but can become electricity, Parker went to the drawing board with his suit in order to ground it so that it wouldn't transfer the deadly electric shock to Peter. This leaves the two at an impasse. Spider-Man can't web Electro, and Electro can't jolt Spider-Man. And really, there's only so many times you can pull that whole dissipate him with water thing. Peter's gonna need that when an alternate reality Electro comes looking for Spider-Man, because chances are any Spider-Man will do. We all know how it is having to fumble with your phone trying to change modes, or switch from your music streaming app to your podcasting app. It's awkward, and in a lot of places if you're driving, you're not even allowed to touch your phone because it can be distracting. Certainly that's even more so the case when you're fighting bad guys. While the voice assistants us non-superheroes have are a little fuzzy, leading to dads yelling at their phone in Home Depot trying to send a text. But Peter got that sweet Tony Stark AI to obey his voice commands, allowing him to switch modes quickly, something we'll see more of in No Way Home. Peter Parker has had a long and kind of strange relationship with the Fantastic Four, even joining them briefly. He's also had to borrow some of their unstable molecule outfits to get home, but they don't wear masks, so he had to wear a paper bag on his head. Classy. Still beats taking the bus though. The Human Torch even gave him his most confounding gadget, a dune buggy, because that's what a New York-based superhero who can swing from buildings needs, a car built for sand dunes in the West. But they've had their dust-ups, and one of the pieces of kit that Peter devised for the original Burning Man was ice webbing, until he figured out that his regular webbing worked just fine. It still might come in handy in his coming 6-on-1 battle royale. Rhino might not be the kind of villain that's hard to get a hold of, but he's certainly hard to put a dent in. To deal with that, Peter went a little more drastic than usual, developing an acid-laced webbing that would eat away at his armor. Later, he figured out that he could just adjust it to take on Sandman with the acid dissolving the grains of sand that make up his body. Ew. If you think that the sky is dustier than it would be normally, that's because Sandman is joining the party. Then the acid webbing would come in handy, or if you think that Rhino will finally get his due by returning. Spider-Man is not the only one with technical gadgets and doodads. Most of his enemies have also deployed a raft of gizmos to take on that menacing Spider-Man. A lot of that involves remote devices, not unlike Mysterio and his hundreds of drones. In the comics, he's deployed a magnetized webbing meant to disrupt remote control devices. The Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus are both fond of gadgets and have used remote control devices in the past, so maybe Peter will need to add some magnet charge to his webs. Peter Parker and Miles Morales aren't the only ones to take up the Spider mantle, but some of them have been convoluted, like the rogue clone that was meant to destroy Peter Parker, but instead took names from his Guardians and fought the good fight as Ben Reilly. To put his own spin on things, he developed an impact web that would wrap around the target at impact while retaining tensile strength. That's handy for all those special packages for the police, though it doesn't look like they'll be too into those in No Way Home. As ridiculous as it is, I really would love to see that dune buggy make an appearance in the old multiverse. Maybe he could use it for like a road trip when he teamed up with Deadpool. A Deadpool Spider-Man road trip in a dune buggy? Ha! What's not to love? Speaking of which, is it too much to ask for an appearance from either Paul Giamatti or Thomas Hayden Church in the next trailer? Please, Marvel, come on! I need yet another video to analyze every single frame of. Please, I'm begging ya!